Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal, and over the last few weeks we've been covering closely some of the class revamps and changes arriving with the 11.05 update, whether it is more refinements for some of the hero specs such as the Dark Ranger or Totemic Shaman, which initially didn't quite meet their mark in terms of thematics or gameplay, but I see it a big turnaround with the 11.05. Or the plethora of different class changes for more talent options, more opportunities for you to expand your build variety, to give you new gameplay elements, and find new ways to combine certain talents and abilities that didn't really play together much better in unison. For classes like mages, shamans, hunters, rogues, paladins, so many good changes are on the horizon. Though while some classes get a lot of time in the spotlight, others don't, and one of those classes is monks. And even if they're not getting as big a swath of changes as some of the others, they're still just as meaningful and just as important, providing them new gameplay opportunities and new talents to create brand new experiences, but also change up some of the hero talents to be even better than before. And that's what I really want to do for today's video, is to really fully explore all of the different revamps coming to the class of monk. And if you want to see future class coverage like this and big overviews for future updates, be sure to follow the channel and subscribe. But otherwise, let's dive in into all the newest monk changes. So if you're playing a monk right now in the War Within, what can you expect out of the 11.05 update? And monks are not getting too many new things, but as of this recent build, now there's a sizable list of everything that is being changed. First of all, one of the adjustments they're doing for every single class spec in the game is actually changing how some of their talent icons work. So it's mostly just a cosmetic thing, not really a gameplay system change, but the ability of Jade Fire Stomp now has a slightly different icon. And I'm going to open up an extra bonus tab that's enlarged so you can actually see the detail of the Jade Fire Stomp. You really can see the feet of the monk, but it has more of this like monk aesthetic rather than this like Night Fae Forest Fae creature aesthetic to it. The same thing can be seen for the Monk Brewmaster ability of Weapons of Order, where previously it was some kind of like a being that's being powered up by arcane energy. Now it's more of a visage of an elf standing around with this like swirling chi all around them, which actually kind of fits the animation of the Weapons of Order as chi swirls around the fists and the feet of the monk, which are honestly your deadliest weapon. As for the class of monk, I first want to start off with more generalized changes, such as the changes and adjustments to the Shadowpan playstyle. For Shadowpan, I think that we're able to kind of squeak out a bit of a victory with this playstyle by the tail end of the alpha and the beta, because at the start, Conduit Celestial came out of the woodworks with a big Celestial Conduit pulsating jade damage to everything around you, doing millions of damage and millions of healing depending on your spec. And it has flavor, it has passion, it has this whole like thematic components to it, but Shadowpan was a lot more muted, it was a lot more silent, and didn't quite meet the mark with the Shadowpan thematically, and I don't think this version is still doing that specifically. I would have loved to see some awesome visuals out of it, but I think they've done like a little bit of good work so far throughout the beta, but they're really trying to define more the gameplay components of Shadowpan this time around, specifically around the ability of Flurry Strikes. Now, what they want to do with Flurry Strike's ability is to allow Shadowpan monks to activate Flurry Strikes more frequently and have a better understanding and to some degree control of when Flurry Strikes are going to be unleashed. Because the ability is super passive, but it plays around so many different little components within your playstyle, such as Against All Odds, which grants Flurry Strikes to fuel you full of agility, giving you a big burst window for 5 seconds, or even the various buffs that you get from Wisdom of the Wall, which can even overlap with one another. All of these beneficial effects can actually be quite powerful, but having control and figuring out exactly when to proc Flurry Strikes, when you can delay it, when you can unleash it, having that kind of like information on your screen at all times will be helpful. So now with the ability of Flurry Strikes, there's now an energy tracker. So as you're spending energy on your monk, you'll actually notice there's this little Flurry Strikes energy tracker that tracks the ability of Flurry Strikes. Flurry Strikes still can be built up by doing damage with Fist of Fury, as well as your Blackout Kick, Spinning Crane Kick, all of your basic combat abilities. Anything you do still allows you to build up the stacks of flurry charges, but it now gives you like a tracking buff of Flurry Strikes that tells you how much energy you've already spent for the ability. So you can now track it a lot easier, and now you know that, hey, I'm sitting around 220. If I spend any more energy, then I'm going to unleash it. So now it gives you a little bit of an idea like exactly what to watch out for when it comes to your buffs, and I think it just adds some much needed visual clarity. That being said, if you're someone who's going to try to get better at a Windwalker, there's a good chance you're going to utilize a weak aura instead to help you track when the proc is about to happen, but given a new player info you need without necessarily requiring a weak aura, I think overall is a good and a quality update overall though. But they also changed out the way that the Flurry Strikes ability works. Right now in the game, you can't cancel them anymore. And this is something monks were doing. If let's say, oh, it looks like my Flurry Strikes is going to be up before my cooldowns are available or before the boss is going to have a big burst window, I want to cancel Flurry charges. You can't. I'm right clicking them right now and you can see kind of some of the other buffs that I can cancel out. So it's one of those buffs that you can no longer remove, so you have to play around with it. But because you can no longer really fully control and cancel the charges of Flurry Strikes, which I think just adds a whole new set of complications and so on, Flurry Strikes will now be unleashed more frequently because they'll now cost a little bit less energy. Now it takes 240 energy to spend them instead of, I think the original number was 300. So it gives you less Tiger Palms or less bruise, less keg smashes in order to be able to proc your Flurry Strikes ability, so it means you get to use it far more regularly. Because of this, because you're getting more frequent procs of Flurry Strikes, they are compensating it with a slightly lower damage output because you get a lot more of them, but damage has been reduced very, very slightly. The Flurry Strike accumulator threshold has also been increased by 47%, and by accumulator, I think it is the modifier, like the damage component of this ability. Every 300,000 damage you deal, you generate a Flurry charge, and I think that's what they mean by accumulator. So it takes you a little bit more energy, or rather damage invested, in order to be able to get all of your procs, but it really doesn't feel that different just from me hitting the train dummy in pure single target, which is like the only opportunity where you may find yourself a little bit behind on the damage output. You still are able to reach 10 stacks way before you end up spending all of that energy in order to get another Flurry Strikes back. So this just simply allows it to not, I guess, over-consume and over-generate too many stacks of charges. Now, since we're getting more Flurry Strikes, there are some adjustments in terms of buffs. Like, for example, against all odds, it's going to have a 5-second window instead of a 6-second window, which gives you a pretty big burst window, and because you're able to use Flurry Strikes more often, you actually, I think, get more against all odds uptime at the end of the day. The other buff that they also adjusted is Wisdom of the Wall. Now that you're getting more regular uses of Flurry Strikes, they actually adjusted the buff window of Wisdom of the Wall to be 16 seconds instead of 20. However, even right now, it's still pretty easy for a Shadowpan monk to overlap multiple uses of Wisdom of the Wall together, so you could actually benefit from 2 buffs at the same time for, I want to say, between 5 to 10-ish seconds, somewhere maybe in the middle ballpark, depending on how much damage or what type of opener you're going for. Now, based on some of the early numbers, and this should be taken with a grain of salt, but early numbers, early sims, early stuff suggest that this is either a solid damage buff, either a decent buff to damage, or a net neutral adjustment for Shadowpan, but if anything, it's a quality of life improvement for that playstyle, less micromanaging, less having to cancel out the buff in order to save it for a better window. You just get to utilize it more regularly. And they wanted to make Shadowpan, I think, a very, very passive playstyle, and they're simply just trying to refine it to be that passive, but a powerful playstyle either way. It's something that you see procs, you see buffs, you want to take advantage of them in the moment, but you should be getting them so regularly that you shouldn't have to try to delay the ability and delay its damage up until that perfect specific moment. Another set of monk changes have actually been to some of the basic damage of Windwalker, specifically towards the ability of Blackout Kick. Blackout Kick damage has been buffed by 20%. There's a reason for it, but Blackout Kick being a decent single target ability or sometimes a cleave AoE ability, it is primarily a good portion of your single target damage output, especially since it has the whole mechanic of Teachings of the Monastery where you can bake up a bunch of Blackout Kicks in a row and unleash them all at once, and there's plenty of other talents that play around the Blackout Kick damage output. Flurry of Zuen is another talent that's also been buffed up by 40%, which seems like quite a solid bit of buff at first. However, all of those buffs to Blackout Kick and Flurry of Zuen are really because they actually adjusted certain talents that were functioning a little bit funny. Specifically the talent of Courageous Impulse, which was not working properly. Basically, they fixed an issue that caused Courageous Impulse to incorrectly buff the damage of Blackout Kick by more than intended. So here, Blackout Kick procs increased the damage of a Blackout Kick by 125%. It was apparently doing a lot more over on the live realms. They also fixed an issue that caused the same talent of Courageous Impulse to incorrectly buff the damage of Teachings of the Monastery Blackout Kicks. So as you build up those Blackout Kicks from Teachings of the Monastery, those also would be incorrectly buffed up by this effect, which results in a basically like either a slight damage buff or a net neutral change that doesn't change their playstyle whatsoever. And that is the whole point. This is one of those changes that is meant to not change or nerf monk profile, just meant to bug fix certain things while also adjusting the profile so they're basically back to where they were, but maybe also slightly more improved with the Shadowpan and Windwalker combination of adjustments as of this week's build. Overall, it's a form of class refinement, and that is something we'll love to see over on the PTR realms, as has been a big portion of this PTR update in the 10.11.05 update is the refining of certain classes and playstyles. And speaking of refining, let's talk about Mystery Monk for a second. For Mystery Monks, we saw a couple of quality of life adjustments. The first one is going to be mostly focused on PvP content, and that is going to be the ability, or rather passive, called Dome of Mist. This isn't going to affect dungeon and raid players, but for PvPers, this is a huge buff. Normally, as a Mist Weaver, Enveloping Mist is a core ability to help bring an ally back from danger, as it allows you to funnel an insane amount of single target healing, with Enveloping Mist healing over time, increasing the healing the ally takes from you by 40%. However, in PvP, there are issues. If an enemy dispels this powerful yet mana expensive ability, it creates a lot of issues for Mist Weaver gameplay. So they're giving them some dispel protection, where if Enveloping Mist does get dispelled, it becomes Dome of Mist, converting the healing over time effect into a shield, but also retaining a portion of the healing received effect. This is mostly a quality of life adjustment for PvP players in particular, so they don't need to invest an extra talent point into the PvP talents in order to have some dispel protection. And it's actually one of those type of changes we've seen over the last few expansions, in fact, with a lot of classes, with some of those PvP components becoming core to the class, where it's not something you can utilize in dungeons and raids, but it is definitely something that is noticeable within PvP specifically. Also, is this just me, or is this animation new, potentially? I think it's with aspect of harmony. Normally, I don't see a lot of players play with Master of Harmony, but I didn't really know that you have this, like, jade energy stored up in the character. That actually looks kind of neat. I've never actually noticed it. It looks really, really good. Either way, we're just gonna ignore the fact that I'm sparking up like a firework right now, because Mr. Monk's got even more talents and even more talent choices. First things first, there's two types of monks that exist. There's the Fist Weaver monks that really get up in melee, that want to do as much damage as possible to heal a nearby ally, and then there's monks that want to stay at range and play around a Cast Weaver type of spec. And depending on the type of monk that you choose to play, you either play up in melee, fighting the enemy to heal your allies, turning aggression into support, or focus on healing from a distance, but you kind of give up a lot of that front-loaded damage. Though this melee healing or damage to heal component is still core to the class of monk, and they really are trying to define it as like, yes, it is a core mechanic no matter the type of monk you choose to play. And the way they do this is by making ancient teachings baseline for all builds of monk. So Tiger Palm, Black Hat Kick, Rise of Sun Kick, and now Crackling Jade Lightning will heal 5 nearby injured allies within 40 yards for a portion of the damage you do, split evenly among them. Now, this is a weaker version of ancient teachings, but there are some talents that allow you to bring it back to full value if you really want to fully commit into a Fist Weaver based gameplay, or if you want to be able to do some side healing, some passive healing while focusing on damage. Let's say like if your party is super safe and there's not going to be any mechanics that are going to be killing anybody, and you just want to add some additional damage to kill the boss a little bit faster, you now have a bit more of this passive healing component added to whatever build a monk you choose to play. But with that does unlock us the ability to get some new talent choices and options. So going off of the Jadefire Stomp ability, we now have a different talent called Jadefire Teachings, which basically brings up Ancient Teachings transfer of damage to healing to its full value back up as it is on Alive Realms. But the keen eyed of you will also notice that now Jadefire Teachings is not the only talent in the row. In fact, it actually has a competitor called Rushing Wind Kick, which actually replaces Rising Sun Kick. But both of these talents can now serve as something that can either be used as to melee heal, but also to provide additional range healing gameplay as well. Now, with the talent of Russian Wind Kick, not only do you get a modified version of Rising Sun Kick, but also a very cool animation. So if you're a big fan of monks doing a bunch of backflips and graceful aerial maneuvers, this is what the ability now looks like. It has this like frontal flip type of kick effect to it, as well as like a frontal conal ability as well. As you can see, kind of like how the winds part and head forward into a frontal cone in front of the character. And it allows the ability of Russian Jade to be used from range, so you can reach enemies from 25 yards away, which is quite a bit of a distance. And the ability of Russian Jade Kick can also grow in power. For every enemy that it hits with a frontal cone, it actually has its damage increased by 6% for each target hit by up to 30. However, it also has a different use as a more ranged healer as well, because you could either pick up this talent from a connection from Jadefire Stomp, or you can pick it up from connection to abilities such as Peer into Peace or Pull and Miss, because both of them play around the ability of Rising Sun Kick, but also around the ability of Renewing Mist as well. A very powerful healing over time effect that can be amplified through a variety of other talents, like after popping the Renewing Mist on a target, that target takes 50% more healing from the monk. So the ability of Russian Jade Wind comes with two effects. Not only does it have a frontal nature cleave effect to it that grows in power, but also it grants you the buff of Rushing Winds for 4 seconds when you use it, which increases the healing of Renewing Mist by 50% for a few seconds. So if you can get a bunch of these Renewing Mists all across as many allies as possible, and then you use the kick, you actually increase the effectiveness of that heal by quite a bit, though only for a few seconds. So it's something that you may want to maintain and may want to refresh every so often. But now there's a new synergy between the ability of Renewing Mist as well as the Rushing Wind kick, which can be used from range. Now, another component of Monk that they really wanted to iron out as best as possible is the ability of Life Cocoon. It is a decent external ability that could save an ally in a pinch, but compared to some of the other healing externals like Hand of Sacrifice, or Blessing of Sacrifice rather, or Pain Suppression, which are damage reduction components, those are generally seen as more valuable within higher end raiding or PvE content sometimes. But they're trying to make Life Cocoon a little bit better of an ability that you could throw at a tank or throw at an ally, and there's 2 new talents that can modify it, either with Refreshment, where Life Cocoon will grant you up to 5 stacks of Mana Tea, which is better for your resources, but also applies on your target 2 stacks of Healing Elixir. Healing Elixirs are elixirs that normally a monk can have as a passive that you'll consume once you drop below a certain amount of health that heals you for a portion of your total max health. And you get to put 2 of these Healing Elixirs on an ally, so it gives you a little bit more of this like survivability, cheat death kind of component towards your Cocoon ability. Not only do you give the shield, but also increase healing, but if the ally drops after the shield pops, then they'll still have some healing that will heal for a portion of the maximum health, and on a take with a lot of health, that could actually result in quite a bit of overall healing. Another component of the ability of Life Cocoon is, well, what if we just made it stronger as a shield? So you can increase the absorb amount of Life Cocoon by 80%. So instead of playing around this cheat death mechanic, you can just make that shield extra beefy. So if the tank is getting slammed by a big ability from a boss, being able to absorb a bigger portion of that damage can potentially save a tank in that type of situation. And I think it's really cool how they're trying to make Life Cocoon a little bit stronger of an ability, and I wonder if either of these talents is actually going to get a lot of play, but it's interesting to see how they're trying to give monks a little bit more of this emergency healing value. Finally, we got a very new and very exciting talent called Jade Fire, or Jade Empowerment rather. Casting Thunder Focus T now increases your next Crackling Jade Lightning's damage by 800%, and it causes the ability to chain to 4 additional enemies. So if you ever seen Palpatine go unlimited power, now as a monk you can literally play around with the same talent and literally go unlimited power. It's so cool. I love the chain, I love the AoE, it looks great, and the fact that it can clean multiple targets is also really cool. Now, we talked before about some of the mechanics such as your ability to deal damage to heal your allies, and how they're trying to get the Cast Weaver playstyle a little bit more parity with the Fist Weaver. So this is another talent that could potentially make that cast range healer a little bit more aggressive in the future. On the same choice note, we also have Dance at GG, which actually has also been buffed up by quite a bit. I think it increased the proc rate of this ability by 100%, so it should hopefully be proccing a little bit more consistently if that is something you want to invest into. I think it's really cool, but they also did a couple other things to buff up monks even further. Initially they buffed the damage of Crackling Jade Lightning, but then they toned back on it. Instead, they just allowed it to channel faster, and the ability costs no resources, so you can just spam it as much as you want to from range. So maybe the Cast Weaver range healing monks might end up utilizing more. But also the ability of Blackout Kick has also been buffed up by 25% on top of it. So that Fist Weaver gameplay, that melee healing is still going to be a fairly strong and a fairly potent component. They also were able to combine 2 talents together with a talent that worked off of Awakened Jade Fire. It was basically 2 separate talents, one that allowed Blackout Kick to cleave multiple targets while standing in your Jade Fire line. And the other talent that allowed your Tiger Palms to strike twice to build up the stacks of Monastery a little bit quicker, while also allowing you spinning Crane Kick tools to heal for a portion of the damage dealt. So they basically combine two of those damage talents or damage healing talents into one, allowing you to gain an extra talent point to spend anywhere you want to, whether you want to pick up that AoE Crackling Jade Lightning, or pick up some of the newer talents, or potentially an empowerment for your Chi Cocoon ability. But for now, that is going to be literally everything coming to the class of Monk for the 11.05 update, which isn't as big of a revamp as what some of the other classes have gotten, but the refinement for hero talents that we've seen so far, with things like Dark Ranger and Totemic Shaman, and now the Shadowpan Monk, those are really good to see. Given new talent options for Mistweaver as well as making some of those PvP talents or even PvE talents more baseline, but also offering them new ways to play the same class that they've been able to play, while also finding ways to bridge the gap between two types of healer builds, I think is a good step going forward, and allows for a little bit more class diversity and variety, because previously certain talents just you weren't really going to play if you played one build or the other, but now there's a little bit more parity and more of a crossover depending on the types of playstyles you choose to get into. But with that, I do want to thank all of you guys so much who watched this video, and I hope all of you did enjoy it. If you did enjoy it or found it informative, go ahead and give this video a like. I would very much appreciate it. Join our Discord community to continue the Monk discussion, because it is one of my favorite classes that I've been able to enjoy over the last few expansions, and I'm so excited about some of these changes going forward in 11.05 update. Also, let me know all your thoughts in the comments down below, and as always, I'll see all of you guys in the next one.